Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm just going to do a quick audio check. So hopefully you can hear me and I'll put it in the chat. If you could just let us know where you're visiting us from and how many people are with you, you can just pop it into the chat. Thanks, everyone. Marianne, I think we'll give it maybe one more minute.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, well, we can get started. And as people join us, I will let them into the room. So hi, everyone. My name is Jen Lesage, and I am the Program and Facilitator Support Lead with Safe Care BC, the Health and Safety Association for BC's continuing care sector. It's a pleasure for us to partner with our friends at the Alzheimer's Society of British Columbia today, who our lovely facilitator, Mariana, will be sharing her knowledge and expertise in our webinar. Before we begin and I hand the microphone over to Mariana, just a few quick housekeeping things. We are recording this session and it will be available afterwards. We will also be sharing the slides with you. I'm just going to ask that you please keep your microphone and your camera off. And if you have any questions, to put them in the chat using the chat function. If you'd like your question to be anonymous, you can message me directly. My name is Jen Lesage, and we will ask it anonymously for you. If you have any technical issues, please put them in the chat window and I can assist you later. And I just want to start today's webinar by recognizing that we are gathered on the ancestral and unceded territory of First Nations, Inuit and Métis people across British Columbia. We thank them for being good caretakers of the land and allowing us to be visitors on the shared territory to do good work. And so I'll introduce Mariana Hudson. Mariana,
Wonderful.
take it away.
Take it away. Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you very much. And welcome to everyone who's joining us today. We have a small group today, but I hope we'll have a more intimate chat as a result of that. So let's get started. My name is Mariana Hudson, and I'm so thrilled to be with you today, presenting the Alzheimer's Society of BC's webinar called Dementia Care Teams, Working with Families. Now, this webinar was developed for healthcare workers in diverse settings, from home care to long-term care, who provide care and support to people living with dementia. Now, today, I understand some of you, the small group we have may be students, you might be in a supervisory role or frontline staff. Whatever your role is, I welcome you to our presentation. And I'd also like to start by really saying thank you to Safe Care BC for organizing this webinar today. The Alzheimer's Society of BC has an ongoing partnership with Safe Care BC. In our non-COVID times, we typically offer an in-person workshop called Creating Connections, working with people with dementia. But of course, today we're happy to be here to connect with you through this webinar platform. So Jen actually just went through many of these housekeeping tips, so I won't repeat them, just of course, keeping your microphones and video off and sending your notes to Jen if you have a specific question you want to keep anonymous. I will say that at the very end of this webinar, I like to wait and hear what some of the questions are that come out of these discussions. So I will be putting together a resource document that addresses some of those questions, but also shares some of the links that I'll be talking about of resources that I will be sharing with you today. So I think that's probably it for the housekeeping piece. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm the provincial coordinator for healthcare provider education, and I work in the advocacy and education team at the Alzheimer's Society of BC. The Alzheimer's Society of BC's vision is a world without Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, and that world begins with a more dementia-friendly society, where people who are affected by dementia are acknowledged, supported, and included. We are the only province-wide charity that is dedicated to supporting people living with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, their family, friends, and healthcare providers. Now, in my role, I spend the majority of my time supporting healthcare providers to learn the skills and the knowledge that they need to provide person-centered care to people who are living with dementia. We'll explore that concept of person-centered care when we talk about including family members as a part of the care team in just one moment. So what are we going to review today? In this session, you'll be learning about the experiences of families and staff members who are supporting people who are living with dementia. I'll go over some tips and strategies for building successful relationships by really focusing on that concept of a dementia care team. And finally, I'll review some of our Alzheimer's Society BC resources that are available to you as healthcare providers, but also to families that you support. Excuse me. I'd like to point out that throughout this webinar, I'll be using the term family members to represent all types of support for people living with dementia. Family can be blood relatives, but they can also be close friends or other support people. The important takeaway there is that the person or the people that know the person living with dementia well. I'll be spending about 30 minutes or less covering these topics, and then I'll set aside about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to address any comments or questions that you may have. But as Jen said, throughout the presentation, you're welcome to add questions in the chat as we go along. So why are we talking about families today? Many people who work in healthcare settings report that they feel reasonably secure in their ability to work with a person who's living with dementia, but they have a difficult time understanding and working with the person's family. Also, we recognize the year that many of you have experienced and continue to experience, and a big part of that has been your encounters, both positive and perhaps more challenging, with family members. Now, whether you work in community care, long-term care, acute care, or any other setting for that matter, having an understanding of what families go through on the dementia journey can help you enlist them as valuable partners in the care of the person living with dementia. We want to take some time to review the importance of working together as a care team and how to build those successful relationships. So in all, my hope for you today is that you maybe learn one new strategy to incorporate into your relationship building with families. Or perhaps you can just take a moment from your work today, have that opportunity to pause and reflect on the way that you currently interact with families in your different work settings. So I'm going to start with a discussion in the chat box. I welcome you to share your thoughts. When you hear the term person-centered care, what comes to mind for you? Either maybe it's a definition or just a feeling or about it. But in the chat box, I welcome you to just write a couple words or a sentence. But what does person-centered care mean to you? And I'll just give you a moment there while I clear my throat. And again, if you don't want to type it in, you're welcome to send your thoughts or your comments to Jen directly. So we have, I'll just read some of the comments out. Thank you for sharing, including the residents in all aspects of their care. This would or can include their loved ones if they so wish, absolutely. And thinking about the person we are caring for first, absolutely. All of those aspects are exactly what person-centered care is about. Care that focuses or places the individual first. And we plan scheduling of tasks around what is most important to the resident. Absolutely. So their preferences, you're looking at valuing them as people. You start with them first and you include and the inclusive part of the resident and their family member as needed. Excellent. That's exactly what it is. And those are great practical examples as well. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts in the chat. I'll just move on from there. And what your answers demonstrate too is that there's a lot of different facets and components to person-centered care. There really isn't one way to describe it, but what it comes down to at the end of the day is, as many of you said, putting that person first. So whatever's important to them, their preferences, and the people important to them in their lives. So I'm just going to share one of the definitions that we use at the Society, which is hopefully coming up on the screen here. And this comes from the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, and it kind of summarizes a lot of things that all of you just added to the chat, which is that person-centered care is a philosophy of care that recognizes that individuals have unique values, personal history, and personality, and that each person has an equal right to dignity, respect, and to participate fully in their environment. So as you can see here, the emphasis is placed on that person, and it's on their unique values, their personal history, so their story, their experiences. Excuse me, sorry, I'm not sure what's going on today. And in addition to that part of their story, it's also that each person has an equal right to that dignity, that respect, and to be seen as someone who is capable of participating in their environment. And person-centered care is still considered the best practice in dementia care. It's something that everyone should be striving for in their role supporting a person. Now, I do want to just highlight one other component with person-centered care is that this is actually not a term that's solely reserved for people living with dementia. In fact, it's a concept that's used with most patients or clients or residents who receive support and care in our medical system. And it makes sense because you're treating the person as a person. We need to treat people as people. But the reason person-centered care is very important with people living with dementia is because living with dementia, as you may know, can change how people see you. There is a stigma that surrounds the many diseases that can cause dementia that can influence how you may interact with a person living with dementia. More often than not, people living with dementia say that they don't feel included in decisions about them because of that dementia label. So our organization, like many others that support people living with dementia, promote person-centered practices in how we communicate and how we respond to changes in behavior when someone is living with dementia. Now, how does person-centered care fit with our discussion today about working with families? And it's including the family as actually one of you mentioned in the chat is an aspect of being person-centered. When we define person-centered care, we talked about the importance of knowing the person, recognizing their story, their unique values and preferences, and ensuring that their dignity and receiving dignity and respect. Now, an important part of that person is the people that surround them. So staff in any setting need to ensure that family members are invited, that they're encouraged and supported in being involved and engaged in the life of the person with dementia. Staff can be person-centered by valuing and including family and friends, by involving them actively in the support network, and seeking them out, including them as valued members of that care team. Each member of this care team brings value and unique experience, creating meaningful and respectful relationships between healthcare providers, that is the staff, people living with dementia, and families can actually improve the quality of life, really for everyone that's involved. So one important way to, oh, hold on, sorry, this video I'm gonna show, oh, no, didn't start, great. Sorry, one important way to provide the best care possible to a person living with dementia is to develop strong relationships between families and staff. These relationships need to be based on clear communication and mutual respect. Now, in about 2019, the Alzheimer's Society of BC and Safe Care BC partnered to develop a video on this very topic. Both organizations recognize the importance of successful care teams. Families and continuing care providers work together to provide good quality, person-centered care for people living with dementia. Yet, as many of you probably know, sometimes this experience can be marked by frustration or resistance from both sides. This video I'm about to show you takes an honest look at the relationship between families and continuing care providers of people living with dementia. It explores the challenges and successes of caring for people living with dementia with the aim of fostering more understanding between the two groups. So I'm just going to show you about 3 minutes of this 8-minute video. We'll focus on the part 1 of the video, which is facing challenges. And it provides, again, that perspective of the family member as well as the staff. The setting of this video is in long-term care. I just want to point that out. So I'll just show you this, and Jen, pop in if you can't see or hear the video when I start it. So I'll just begin this now. Sorry about that. I muted. Here we go.
So initially at the beginning, I really didn't know how to get help. I didn't have anybody to turn to.
There's always a challenge. Every day, I'm challenged to be the very best that I can possibly be to help them get through their day.
The person in my family living with dementia is my mom. She's 67 years old. I care for her full time.
I didn't have any clue what Alzheimer's was like. And when I found out online that it was a terminal illness, now that was pretty shocking for me.
I came to the conclusion that denial wasn't solving any of my problems, and realized there was something seriously wrong. The recommendation was made that she go into full-time residential care. I've accepted the reality of what Alzheimer's and the dementias are, and will support and be with her until the end.
I wish they knew the woman that I knew, and always people ask me, when you see your mom, does she know who you are? And it's like, I know who she is, that's why I go.
So I love being able to give them a warm blanket, give them their cup of tea the way they like it, and just be comforting.
What I love about my role as a care aide is being able to go to work and see the same faces every day, and I've built some relationships with some of the residents.
Working with folks that are dealing with a dementia-based behaviors is what I've gravitated towards over the last 10 years of my career.
What drew me to this career is the passion, the love.
I love them dearly, but I can never love them like a family member. And I will never care for them as much as a family member feels they need to be cared for.
Because there's a rotation of people all the time, almost every day I have to re-explain mom's needs. So it's a constant re-explanation. This is very exhausting to an already exhausted full-time family caregiver.
I wish that the family members would understand that their loved one isn't the only person that we have in our care. We do still have 7 to 14 other residents to take care of amongst the 2 coworkers.
The thing with people with Alzheimer's or with any of the dementias is that they can't speak up for themselves. And we have to take on that role of being the voice for them.
And daily I'm challenged with having to decipher their needs from their emotions. Sometimes it's not a verbal, they're not able to verbalize that for me. So they're wearing their emotions on their sleeves, as they say, as we're trying to be detectives and decipher what it is this person needs, what the unmet need is that's creating this emotional crisis that we're finding them in.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there. As I said, this is an 8-minute video, so I just wanted to show you just the first 3 minutes of it, just to introduce you to some of the perspectives that were provided. So although you just got to see a handful of those perspectives, and we just talked about the first part of the video, which was facing the challenges, the second part goes into some of the strategies and examples. I want to open up just another chat discussion for all of you who were able to watch the video. I want you to think about the comments that were provided from the families there, family members, as well as the care staff. Can you relate to any of the sentiments that were expressed by the families or staff? Or just share your observations in the chat. I'll give you a few moments there to gather your thoughts and share your perspectives. Great. So we here absolutely can relate to both family and care providers. Great. Thank you for sharing that. The same struggles are everywhere. Absolutely. In every setting, really, not just in long-term care where this took place, but in lots of other settings, in home care as well, for example. So this is a good indication from the two of you who have written in the chat that this video has demonstrated some realistic experiences from both of these groups of people, which is good to hear. That doesn't sound like it's a surprise to many of you. Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I will move on. Oh, I think one more person, sorry. Families are often grieving, not easy to let go, and staff are learning to know the resident takes time. I have definitely heard both sides of this. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Great. So I'll just move on to the next slide, which is sort of a bit of a continuation of some of these ideas that have been shared.
My client,
there we go. Sorry, I'm just fighting with my slides. Just 1 second here, please. Here we go. Okay, thanks for your patience, everyone. So again, the video we just watched alluded to some of those expectations or the hopes that families and staff have when they're supporting a person in specifically a care home setting in the video. Now, knowing these expectations can help build a better understanding of the other person's experience, which in turn can help you build more empathy. Building empathy can lead to a more understanding and generally a more positive relationship. So in this slide, I'm going to summarize further these two perspectives, what family caregivers want to know and what staff members want families to know about their roles and about their experiences. So let's start by looking at the family caregivers. Family caregivers told us they want staff to respect their input regarding their family member. They know the person and their history, and so they want to be included in being able to provide that information to staff whenever applicable. They want family members want staff to recognize their experience of different feelings. Family members are experiencing all sorts of feelings of loss and grief, as was highlighted in the chat. Especially when a person is changing their roles. So they're either moving into a new place, like a care home, and considering the pandemic we're experiencing, you might even be seeing, I would expect you to be seeing, more feelings of loss and control. Staff need to be mindful of these experiences and, when they can, demonstrate that empathy. While families may recognize that they need help, there is still that feeling that they shouldn't need it, that the person with dementia is their responsibility. That's information that we hear from the caregivers we support all the time. Too often, families promise the person with dementia that they'll never allow them to go into care home. This was before they knew how difficult the journey could be. Families are also grieving the loss of the type of relationship that they had before, the loss of the future that they had assumed they would have together, the loss of the type of communication that they enjoyed with the person, etc. So there's a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions that are going on in that caregiving journey that we need to be aware of when we're supporting them. And finally, families want staff to realize that they only want what is best for their family member, and they just wish that they were still able to provide that. Different care can still be good care, but it can take families a while to accept this emotionally. Now, on the flip side, staff members told us that they want families to recognize their rights. For example, staff want families to recognize that they have the right to step back from care if necessary. So in some situations, you need to protect yourself and have the right to not complete a task if it seems unsafe to proceed. A very quick example is Mr. Jones moves to Shady Pines Care Home 3 weeks ago, and he is finding the transition to actually be quite difficult. So he's been actually yelling at the staff. They have tried 5 times in the past 3 weeks to give Mr. Jones's shower, but each time he has become actually extremely agitated, yelling and throwing the towel at staff. So each time staff have made the decision to step away and put off the shower to another time. So those kinds of situations where you have to just be flexible and change the plan if it's there. Staff also want family members to understand that they must try to respect the preferences of the person. If the person with dementia has the cognitive ability to make some of those independent decisions, the care provider will respect their preferences before those of the family in many cases. And they also want families to know that they care too. Staff acknowledge that they cannot love the person as much as the family, and we heard Brian say that in the video that we just watched. However, they really do care. Also, care providers are spending a lot of time with the person in care and may see that families do not, which informs the care that the individual is receiving. Now, what I don't have on this slide is just an additional piece that we've heard from staff is that staff actually find it helpful when families know what dementia is, when they're educated about it and understand kind of what the progression looks like. Staff can get frustrated when families do not seem to have that basic knowledge of dementia, and it makes their job easier and the care of the person with dementia that much smoother when the families take the time to learn about dementia. So one of the main takeaways with this exercise through the video and this slide that I'm showing you today, one of the main takeaways at the center of this is that we see that both staff and family caregivers do genuinely want the best quality of life and best quality of care for the person. They just might have different ways to provide that care based on their roles and relationship with the person. So acceptance from both sides is important to foster that positive relationship. And as staff in the healthcare field, understanding what family members may be experiencing can help you communicate better as well. So I'll move on to the next slide here. And this part of the webinar will look at some of the more practical strategies. But first, I want to share a metaphor with you. So if everyone wants the same thing in the end, as we just saw, the best quality of life for the person, how do we get there? It's about building trusting relationships, and achieving good communication is one way to do that. And to illustrate this trusting relationship, let's think about the idea of a trust bank account. And this concept comes from author Stephen Covey. So a trust bank account is a metaphor that describes the amount of trust that's been built up in a relationship. It's really about how safe you feel with another human being. When the trust account is high, then communication is actually very easy. It can be instant and very effective. The less we invest our time and energy into building trusting relationships with families, the more that's actually withdrawn from that account. This means that we have less money to work with, which leads to less trust and poor communication. I actually showed this very slide in a recent webinar that I collaborated on with the family caregivers of BC. And I will be sharing that link with you in a resource document. Look out for that. Now, when we discussed this very topic of trust, a CEO from a long-term care home in Nanaimo said that a part of this trust bank account would be sharing the good things along with the bad. She stated, and perhaps this is the experience that many of you have, she stated that staff only call families to report when something bad has happened, an incident had happened, a change in the person's medical condition perhaps. She suggests that if staff can find ways to share the positives in their days, families will actually trust the care, and you'll see an impact on the quality of life. Although there isn't a perfect way to do this, because of course, reporting all the time, positives and negatives, can be time consuming, and it can be challenging to manage that. Just know that it can help when you are able to do this. So if our goal is to work as a team, then we need to do our best to communicate well so that we can build up those trust accounts with the family members that we support. So the next two slides will go into some specific skills tips that I want to share with you on how you can actually strengthen that communication. So building up that trust account that I just talked about requires, of course, deposits from two different sides, from the family and from you as staff. Now, what this slide shows you are actually some tips that we share with family members in our education. These tips help family members have meaningful conversations with healthcare providers, especially when they feel lost with what to do, where to go, or when a challenging conversation needs to take place and they don't really know how to handle it. Not only are these tips useful for you to know to understand a family member's experience. But I would also say that these are some of the good things that you can actually try in your day-to-day practice. So I was going to talk you through kind of how we talk about this with families, but I think just for the sake of time, I'll just summarize it for how can you use this as in your profession, actually. So you can apply these 3 tips of being proactive, keeping good records, and asserting yourself clearly and respectfully in your day-to-day. So I'll just break that down for you. So make sure you're proactive. You can do this by having information handy, resources, for example, before you're about to talk to someone. If you've scheduled a phone call or you're about to meet with them in person, have that information handy or ready to go before you speak to that family member. In sort of along the same lines as being proactive there, keeping good records. So of course, you keep records in the electronic record keeping, but make sure you read them ahead of time. Read them before a meeting so that you can anticipate the family member's needs and that you show the family member that you're informed and you know their story so that they don't have to repeat their story once again if there's a particular situation you're trying to work with them on. And asserting yourself respectfully. Take the time to acknowledge the feelings of the person that you're speaking to, but try to focus on the key issue or the topic at hand to move forward with a solution if that's what the purpose of your conversation is. You may not always come to an understanding or an agreement with a person, especially in a complex situation, but that's of course okay. In those kinds of situations, having a backup plan, when you are anticipating a difficult situation, have a backup plan. So for example, call them back to continue the conversation at a later time, or maybe bring in another colleague of yours in to support you in the future conversation. Those can all be helpful backup plans. The next slide kind of goes into some other things for you to consider when you're trying to build those more successful relationships. And some of these tips relate to families you're just getting to know and you're kind of building those relationships slowly over time. Or perhaps you can even apply some of these things with existing family members and maybe those more challenging situations that you've experienced, especially during the pandemic. I know that relationships changed a bit during the pandemic with the need for communication during all that time. So this can be used in those 2 different kinds of situations. So the communication, of course, is definitely a big topic here. And I want to break this down into a few different elements. So as I discussed in one of our previous slides, communication is key with families and building up that trust account. So as I shared with you about that story from the CEO from Nanaimo, you can try in your discussions to share good news along with bad news or incidents or whatever you want to consider as bad news when you have the chance. So combining those 2 pieces of information. And communicating with families is not always about reporting a situation or giving an update. You can communicate with families when you want to get ideas. So for example, you can seek their input when you're planning activities. This ensures that you're being person-centered by using that team-based approach to care. Also with communication, you want to think about the ways that you communicate verbally and non-verbally with a family member. Verbal communication is all about the words that you're saying, and non-verbal communication kind of refers to everything else. What your body language is saying, so through your gestures, your hand movements, as well as your pitch or your tone of your voice can also be a way to communicate. It's not always about the words that you say, but how you say it that can actually matter and can stick with people emotionally. So pay attention to those words, tone, pace, and body language. You want to ask yourself, do my words match what I'm saying in my body language and the way that I'm speaking? For those of you who maybe have more phone calls with family members, an important tip to remember is on a phone call, remember to smile and focus on your breathing and try to stay focused and not multitask. So if you can, maybe avoid making a phone call when you're on the floor. If you're in a care home setting, running around, maybe avoid making phone calls from the floor so that you don't become easily distracted. If you're having a conversation with a family member, demonstrate that you're engaged in the conversation and that you acknowledge the other person's feelings. You can do this by simply saying something like, "Can you tell me more about that?" Just a simple phrase like that demonstrates you're engaged and you care and you want to know more about what they're trying to express. So another one final piece about communication I'll just mention is that you want to make sure you're sharing information or problem solving with your team as well, your direct team. If you are perhaps in home care, that might be a bit more challenging if you're going from one place to another. You can speak to your supervisor in that way, but if you're working in a care setting, you want to have that communication open with your team. And of course, talking to your supervisor, letting that supervisor know how you're involving the family, sharing any concerns that might come up from conversations. Sometimes you might notice that the family member appears to be stressed or burnt out. Your supervisor at that point can check in and provide additional resources to support that person. The other two elements here that I'll briefly mention, and I realize I'm kind of coming to my end of time, so I'll just speak for a few more minutes and then I'll open up for questions, is empathy and sharing resources. So empathy is all about showing that you understand the person's feelings or their perspective. And you can do this in the moment by saying something like, "This sounds very challenging and stressful," the situation that the person's in. Now you want to think back to that slide where I talked about family members' expectations. So I showed the video and I went through that slide. Know that families are experiencing all sorts of emotions, the grief, loss, and loneliness. And as I mentioned with the pandemic, I'm sure many of you have seen an increased need from family members for information, or perhaps you're seeing additional emotions like fear, worry, or anxiety. Needless to say, there's of course a lot going on in a person's life. So one more thing about empathy that I found very helpful, and maybe this is helpful for you just to, if you ever experience this, have you ever noticed someone who might be repeating their situation over and over to you, either on a phone call, maybe in person, or repeating different situations over a span of time? One possible reason for this type of situation is that the person doesn't actually feel heard. When someone feels unheard or dismissed, they often will say it, whatever the situation they're describing, they'll say it multiple times in different techniques to be heard or understood. So this cycle starts to stop or slow when the listener acknowledges the speaker, again, by saying something as simple as, "This sounds very challenging and stressful situation that you're going through." So I'll end the empathy piece on there, but I will be sharing in the resource document some links about empathy and how you can practice this skill. It can require some patience and time and skill, but it can be a very important way to build a positive relationship. So, and the last piece is sharing resources. Knowing what resources are available to share with families if they seek it. Paying attention again to their words or gestures. That person can be communicating that they're burnt out or they're frustrated. And sometimes what you can do to be incredibly helpful in that situation is, of course, getting them the help in the right moment can make situations easier. Okay, so I was actually going to end the majority of the content with this slide. I don't have as much time as I wanted to, but what I wanted to do within this slide was actually just make a note, acknowledge all of you and the hard work that you're doing right now in your respective settings, and just acknowledge that it can be difficult to build relationships, especially in situations like the pandemic that you're experiencing, or when you're encountering complex family dynamics. But one key takeaway here, and this is a message that we share with family members, and I want to share it with you as well, is about taking care of yourself. Taking care of yourself doesn't mean me first, it means me too. And what the reason I want to point this out is that of course, you've probably heard lots of talk about self-care, about resilience, and taking care of yourself is one of those pieces. It helps you grow resilience, and that is the ability to adjust or change to adversity. Building resilience can help you cope with the changes that you face on a daily basis. So I encourage you to find ways that work for you to take care of yourself so that you can then be present for the families that you're supporting, be present in the workplace, but also, of course, in your own personal lives. So I just wanted to end that piece just by encouraging you to do that. And again, in the resource document, I'll be sharing some links for any mental health resources if that is something that you haven't already sought out for yourself. I encourage you to do so. Okay, so I will just briefly wrap up now before I open up for questions, just to mention that the Alzheimer's Society has many resources for not just family members and for people living with dementia, but also for you, healthcare providers. There's some links here, but again, I'll post it on the resource document so you have a quick access there. But just letting you know that we have a page dedicated to healthcare providers. There's resources there on person-centered care, for example. There's some resources and webinars that you can learn a little bit more about the communication piece that we talked about today. And I encourage you to check us out on social media to get some of that recent dementia news and some of the things that we're working on. This is one of the resources that is available on our website. I'll just point out that this particular booklet supports our healthcare provider education. We have a workshop that we provide. And part 4, as you can see red on the screen there, part 4 says understanding what families experience. This section might be of interest to you to just sort of supplement some of the work, some of the information that I shared with you today on this webinar. And I will kind of I'll leave this page here wanting to share our contact information, my email and phone number as at the bottom of the page. But what I want to highlight is actually our First Link Dementia helpline here. This is a service that is offered to people living with dementia, their caregivers and healthcare providers. And so I would encourage you to call this phone number if you're experiencing a situation at your workplace and you want to get a little bit more information or new strategies or suggestions. This phone number is available for you as well as for the families that you support. So again, I'll put a link there with information about the hours as well as the languages that this is offered in. Okay, so my apologies for taking us a little bit over. I wanted to give a bit more time, but I will now pass it on to you and just open up for any questions that you may have about the content that I shared with you today. And if you don't have any questions, maybe there's an opportunity in the chat for you to share anything that stood out to you that you might want to learn more about or try practicing in your day-to-day at work. I'd be happy to hear from you as well. So I'll just pause there and give you some thoughts, some time there to reflect and share your comments in the chat. And I'll ask Jen to help me out in case there are some anonymous questions. And while some of you are, oh, there might be a question there. Okay, great presentation. Thank you very much for that. And for those of you who, I think we were going to have some students join us today, maybe you haven't had an opportunity to really build relationships with families, or maybe your role doesn't actually allow you to do that just based on your day-to-day. Hopefully this is at least giving you some perspective on what to be considering when you are connecting with family members and really understanding what they're experiencing in their day-to-day, which again can help with that relationship building. But for those of you who would actually like to learn more, I didn't get as much into the strategies today, but one of the webinars I'll be sharing with you on the resource document is actually for the one I referenced earlier with the family caregivers of BC. There's more practical strategies in that webinar that really address maybe those more difficult or challenging conversations that you might have with family members. There's some ways to support you with that. So I'll share that link for anyone who wants to learn more. And I'll stay online for more questions if anyone has any, but in the meantime, I'm going to share a survey link with you in the chat to encourage anyone to fill out our survey if you have some time after either now or after this webinar. We're always looking for ways to learn more and ways to improve our webinars for everyone here. So I'll share that link in the chat box.
Thanks so much, Mariana. That was awesome. So I think we could be good to go to wrap it up. And what I can suggest that if anyone has a question that comes up later on, they can send me an email if you don't have Mariana's email, and I will forward it on and connect you both, as well as once Mariana has her little info sheet and I have a recording and the slides, we will make it all available on the Learning Space, which is where you registered for you guys to take a look. If you could just give us a few days to get all that ready, we'd appreciate that. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a really good day.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.